Hello and welcome to the Table by Two podcast. This is the weekend Warhammer wrap-up, where I go through the 4-1 and 5-0 results and pick out a few lists to talk about in a little more detail. This is episode 5, let's get into it. Here is our tournament results graph. It shows the 4-1 and 5-0 results that armies were able to achieve over the course of the weekend. Number 1 is Sylvaneth, with an impressive amount of results, right? 15 total results. They're an incredibly strong army. We've talked about them a couple times already in this show. Alariel's really good. Colonel Hunters are really good. Drytra and Durthra are a fun combo. Dryads, Spite Revenants, basically everything is just really good. And it shows. They've gotten some strong results, as you can see here. Below them is Daughters of Cain. We've also talked about them a couple times. Incredibly high damage army. They do possibly the most damage of any army in the game. If the ball gets rolling for Daughters, you're not stopping it. Below them is Stormcast Eternals, my army, the army that I play. They're just really solid. They're not crazy good at any one thing, but they're pretty good at a lot of things, and in the hands of a skilled player, you can get a good result out of them. Then you got Blades of Khorne. We talked about them last week. A combination of December Battle Scroll making their battle traits a lot better and points drops has meant they can fit a lot of stuff and do decent stuff with it. There's not much to say about Khorne. Go listen to last week's episode if you want to hear more. Same with Ironjaws, right? It's a points thing. Points have just become efficient on Ironjaws, but also Ironjaws has always been pretty good. In a meta where players are trying, Ironjaws are an army that could be considered a zag, right? And by a zag, I mean when some players are zigging or trying to do weird things, like Lumineth or maybe Tzeentch or whatever, that are trying to pull off a trick, Ironjaws can come in and just hit really hard and catch people by surprise. Maybe Lumineth was not the right example there. I think Lumineth is actually a really hard matchup for Ironjaws, possibly, but Ironjaws can go toe-to-toe with DOK on damage. It might be one of the only armies that can crack Nurgle. And yeah, Tzeentch, I think one of Tzeentch's weaknesses is armies that play aggressively, right? We've got Tzeentch on here, and I'll talk about them in a second, but they're an army that wants to do something, right? They want to pull off a lot of little tricks, and if you give them the space to do that, then they can, take an inch. Or you give them an inch and they'll take it a mile, right? But if you don't give them that inch, then they can't get anywhere, right? They might struggle. You've got Ossiarch Bone Reapers, a new battle tome that people are still figuring out, but has got some strengths. I worry that some of those strengths will get nerfed, not because they are too strong necessarily, but because they're not what Games Workshop intended to be strong out of that book. But we'll see. Then, in the same tier, Lumineth, Skaven, Ogre Mawtribes. We've talked about Lumineth a bunch. They're probably the best book. Maybe up there with Sylvaneth. Sylvaneth, DOK, Lumineth are the 3 strongest battle tomes, I'd argue, right now. And it shows in their results. They get consistent results. There's not a ton of results, but still. In a week where Sylvaneth dominated as much as it did, seeing some Lumineth results is unsurprising. Skaven are an army that we've talked about a little bit. We'll talk about them more later. But, yeah, they're in an interesting spot. I'll talk about it once we get to the list. Ogre Mawtribes we've seen up here. Similar points to Ironjaws, the zigging and zagging. Ogres are another army that just goes up and whacks you really hard, and if you're not prepared for that, you're going to have a tough time. Cities of Sigmar I'm not going to talk about, right? Their battle tome is been leaked or shown off and is about to drop, and we're going to see that hit tables eventually, and there's not really much point me harping on about the index that has just been replaced. Hellsmiths of Ashut are a really fun army. They're doing okay. A good player can get some good results out of them. Have fun Hellsmiths players, I think. Tzeentch and Nurgle we've talked about a bunch. I talked about Tzeentch just earlier, and Nurgle is Nurgle. They're super tanky, hard to kill. you can take Nurgle to a tournament and feel pretty happy about it. Soulblight are an army that have sort of always been pretty strong. Like from their battle tome onwards, they've been a pretty top flight army, and that's shown here. Not much to say about them at this moment. Then we've got Flesh-Eater Courts, which we've talked about. Seraphon, and we also talked about a bunch. Heat Knights of Slaanesh are in a weird spot. Their battle traits are kind of bad, but they've got some decent enough war scrolls that if you're good enough, you can get good results. They've got a very small player base, so getting accurate data on Heat Knights can be pretty hard. And they should be getting a battle tome sometime soon, as they're still one of the armies on an index. Slaves to Darkness we'll talk about later, but a solid army that's pretty cool. Nighthaunt we've talked about in the past. They're a weird army. Their battle traits are very uninspired, and the army in general leaves a lot to be desired, but can get you some results if you're good enough. Cruel Boys are an army that I will talk about later, but they had a big moment in the sun at the start of this General's Handbook, and now they got nerfed a bunch, and that really hurt them. They sort of fell off the radar for a while, but now a lot of those nerfs have sort of been reversed, and now they're back to what they were points-wise around about, and that's meaning that Cruel Boys players can get good results. Like, I think the army is good right now. The problem is that Cruel Boys is a limited army, right? I have a friend that refers it to ketchup or catsup, right? The Simpsons meme. And I feel that, right? Where you're just doing two flavors of the same thing. So, less so the army's bad and more so the army's boring, I'd argue. And then Sons of Behemoth, we've talked about. I'm not going to talk about them much. They're sons. They're their own beast, really. So going on to the power picks. These are my meta picks. The strong list, the things you should look out for. Stuff that I think either define the meta right now or will define the meta going forward. And first we've got this Stormcast Eternals list. It's in the Thunderhead Host battle formation. It's got Lord Commander Bastion Carthalos, reinforced Dracothian Guard Desolators, a Storm Coven, a Stormstrike Chariot, reinforced Longstrike Crossbows, a Knight Relictor with the Beacon of Azir and Legendary Tenacity, 2 units of Questor Soulsworn, and 1 unit of Stormstrike Paladors. And for its battle tactics, it's got Restless Energy and Scouting Force. I think Stormcast is an incredibly good army at scoring Scouting Force. Between Questor Soulsworn, being able to teleport, right? They have a once per battle teleport. Stormstrike Paladors and the other cavalry units in this list, the Desolators, just being fast. You've also got the Stormreach Portal for teleports, as well as teleports from the Knight Relictor with the Translocate Prayer. You've got an army that can be in a lot of places, right? It keeps your opponent on their toes, because at any point, a unit of Questor Soulsworn could be anywhere on the battlefield, and that's incredibly strong, right? It forces your opponent to be constantly thinking about things like that. So I think Stormcast is really good at Scouting Force. The Storm Coven are a wizard that's also a unit, which is pretty cool. They can cast Primal Energy or the spells from the spell lore. It's also got its own War Scroll spell that either gives out Strike First or Strike Last, which is pretty solid. The Chariot is just gotten to a point where it's... So sorry for that. A decent distraction piece, right? 110 points. It's got a decent amount of health on a 3-up save. It's fast. So it's just a unit that can like move around the board and go do stuff. Either like take objectives or... Not really great at damage, but it is just a solid little objective grabber that is not too expensive. It's also a decent screen, actually. I think that's definitely a thing with the Chariot, is that because it's so fast and it's got a reasonably large base, it can screen off portions of the board quite well. And on its 10 health on a 3-up save, it's not tanky, but it can take a hit. My overarching point on Stormcast here, before I go more in depth on some of these units, is on Stormcast as a tanky army. I think a lot of players pick up Stormcast thinking that they're tanky or that they're like unkillable, and that's not the case, right? Stormcasts are an army that does die. They have a big weakness to mortal wounds because they don't really have a ton of ward saves across the board, and they also, don't have massive health pools, which is part of what makes an army like Nurgle tanky, is that they have massive health, large health pools, and also that they have ward saves, right? Stormcast doesn't have that. What makes Stormcast tanky is that their units require effort to kill, right? Because they're on a 3-up save, they're tanky by merit of that, and it requires your opponent to really send certain... It changes the way opponents' threat detection works and the way that they deploy their army or like use their army, right? So a unit like Quest or Soulsworn, it's 18 health total on a 3-up save. If that's on an objective somewhere, your opponent has to send something that they know is going to be able to crack 18 wounds on a 3-up save. But if that unit was 18 health on a 4-up save or a 5-up save, your opponent could send something different, right? If your opponent is playing Skaven, they can't send 20 clan rats to deal with Questor Soulsworn, because the Questors just will brush off the clan rat damage and also do good enough damage on the backswing to like probably win the fight eventually. But if it was a worse unit with a worse save, they could send the clan rats. So it just changes the way your opponent has to deploy and use their army to fight you as Stormcast. One other point is the Thunderhead Host Battle Formation. That gives +1 to hit to all your Warrior Chamber units, which in this list is the Quest of Soulsworn and the Paladors. And also the Chariot and possibly the Storm Coven. They can all get +1 to hit when they're next to either Desolators or Long Strikes, which is pretty good. And then Bastion Carthalos here, I'll point him out. He's become very popular as of late in Stormcast lists. A big problem with Stormcast list building is that is regiment restrictions, right? So the Knight Relictor here, for example, can only take Warrior Chamber units. And a lot of Stormcasters want to take things that aren't Warrior Chamber or Ruination Chamber, which are the two easiest chambers to shore up in lists, because those two chambers have cheap infantry heroes to run, right? For Warrior Chamber, you have basically every hero in the book. In Ruination Chamber, you can run a Lord Terminus or a Lord Relictor or a Lord Ferritant or a Knight Azeros or whatever. There's like so many different options that can run Ruination Chamber units that you don't struggle with that. Same with Warrior. While you've got the two other chambers being Extremist Chamber and Vanguard Chamber. You've got an Extremist Chamber unit here in the Desolators and a Vanguard Chamber unit here in the Long Strike Crossbows. You need a hero then that can take either one of those units, which the heroes that are dedicated to taking either Extremist or Vanguard Chamber are pretty mediocre, or you want a hero that can take anything. And for a hero that can take anything, either you're going up to your big 500, 400 point dragons in like Karazai or whatever, or you're running either Bastion or Tornith the Redeemed, right? Are your two cheap options. And Bastion does a little more for most lists than Tornith does. Bastion's an okay combat piece, so I think he's better. And he has a couple other abilities, a free all-out attack aura, which is quite nice, especially combined with long strike crossbows, right? As your ranged threat, being able to just give them all-out attack for free is quite nice. Same with Desolators, really like all-out attack because of they just do. Right, they're your big main hammer unit in this list. So Bastion's quite nice, and he's your cheapest hero that can take anything. You'll see him in a lot of lists. I've waffled on quite a bit about this list, so let me go on to a couple of the units. Starting with Desolators. These are a unit that did not see a lot of play for quite a while, and they were seen as quite bad. And due to changes in the meta and points cuts, they've now started to see a bit more play. They're a 10-inch move. They've got 5 health each, 2 control, and 3 up save. You get 2 of them in a squad, notably, so they're reinforced to a squad of 4. Then this is their profile here. You've got a ranged attack, which is okay. You've got the Thunder Axe, which is the big one. 3 attacks, 3 threes, rend 1, damage 2. They've got anti-infantry +1 rend on that profile. And then also down here in the Cleaving Blow ability, you get +1 damage for that unit's axe if the target has 10 or more models. And I think as we move into the next General's Handbook, and in the current meta where armies like Daughters of Cain, Lumineth, Tzeentch, Nurgle are all very popular, a lot of those armies rely on big blocks of infantry, right? Daughters of Cain lists will have typically 2 to 3 reinforced blocks of either snakes or elves. You know, Nurgle lists can have sometimes up to 3 blocks of 20 real tanky dudes. On and on and on, right? Lumineth with wardens or whatever. I'm not going to name every single reinforceable infantry unit in the game, but there's a lot of them running around right now, and with Desolators at 170 points for 2 of them, and with their melee profile, I think they're a pretty decent cavalry unit for Stormcast lists. The Claws and Fangs is also a decent melee profile. This is why they really want all-out attack, is to make that go from 4s to 3s on that profile. And then finally this Extremist Chamber rule that does a little bit of mortal wounds when you roll 6s to save. It's nothing crazy, but it's nice to have. Then we got Long Strikes. Vanguard Raptors with Long Strike Crossbows is the full name, but everyone refers to them as Long Strikes. They're your best shooting in the book. One of the best shooting units in the game. 2 attacks each, 3 and 3s, rend 2, damage 2 is just insane. They've got crit auto wound on top of that, so they're pretty good on the covering fire. Giving them +1 to hit from all that attack with Bastion is pretty solid. They've got quite long range, so they can sit back pretty defended as well. They can ignore Guarded Hero, which is kind of nice if you really need to pick off a hero target for something, but not too important. And then also this Vanguard Chamber rule, which is incredibly strong. This is shared between all the Vanguard Chamber units, which gives them run, shoot, and charge, or retreat, shoot, and charge, which is just insane, right? It gives Long Strikes the ability to position themselves almost anywhere on the battlefield. Well, not anywhere on the battlefield, but like run and shoot means they can really get places and still be able to put their damage out. And then retreat and shoot means you can't lock them up. They're very hard. You can't just like send a unit into long. Like they've got an awful melee profile. They will do no damage in melee, but it doesn't matter because they can just retreat and shoot. So they don't need to unlock themselves from melee, quote unquote. They just need to not die, and then they can retreat and still shoot. They're really great. Also to note, Stormcast has an ability that allows them to recur a unit at half strength once per battle for a command point, and Long Strike's a really great target for that. As well as Desolators, honestly. Anything in your army is pretty good to recur when you need it. I think that it can be a trap for Stormcast players sometimes to get really precious about the recur and be like, well, my Long Strikes haven't died yet, so I'm not going to use it. And you should just use it. Like, if it's going to score you a battle tactic or score you points, I think it's worth it to just pop it off. But being able to recur your important units is also very important. Moving on, we've got a Skaven list with a Flesh-Meld Menagerie battle formation. It's got Scouting Force and Master of the Paths. It's got Scourge Goran, Gracier, and Screaming Bell. A Plague Pack. 2 reinforced units of Rat Ogres. Reinforced Rattling Guns. A Gracier with Flesh Meddler. Clan Rats. Plague Pack. Warlock Bombardier. And Clan Rats. Skaven are an interesting army, and we've talked about them a little in the past, but they're suffering from a lot of the same problems as Cruel Boys, where the army isn't terrible right now, but it is quite boring. This list with the Bell and Rat Ogres has been the meta list for a year now. And while you can still play it and have success, it can get boring to play the same list over and over again for a whole year. And that be the only way to play your army competitively. But it is still very strong. The Grey Seer and Screaming Bell either gives you +2 to move or -1 to hit in an aura, depending on what battle round it is, plus a million other things. Rat Ogres are an incredible hammer. They can do a lot of damage. The Plague Pack, your pair of Plague Packs are both priests, so they can chant your prayer law, which includes a prayer that can give out crit mortals, which is very good on Rat Ogres. Rattling guns are a really solid shooting unit that pop out a lot of damage and are pretty great on the covering fire as well. Clan Rats are just great for scoring and scouting force. I think Skaven in a list like this is very good at scoring scouting force. And then the Grey Seer is also a caster, so you have a lot of casts in this list between the Grey Seer and Screaming Bell and the Grey Seer on foot. And then the Warlock Bombardier is just a little hero that shoots and does a bit of damage, but mostly here as a list filler, I would imagine. But overall, Skaven's pretty solid, and this list shows it, right? You've got recursion, you've got decent damage, you're quite fast on the turns in which you've got +2 to move, and then also you've got teleports through your gnaw holes. The manifestations are really good. I'll point out the Bell of Doom, giving you a 12-inch aura of -1 to wound for your infantry units, which between that and the -1 to hit from the Screaming Bell, and Rat Ogres can also possibly get a 5-up ward from the Fleshmeld Menagerie battle formation, you can have a pretty tanky unit of Rat Ogres, right? It's really quite something. So moving on to Rat Ogres themselves, right? Rat Ogres have a really great shooting attack, right? You get 2 of these in a reinforced unit, 2d6 shots, 2s and 4s, rend 2 damage 1 is great. And then melee attacks, you've got 5 attacks at 4s and 3s, rend 1 damage 2. Now, they can get an extra attack from the battle formation. The Flesh Meddler heroic trait that was added to the Grey Seer on foot can give them +1 to rend. They can get crit mortals, and that crit mortals prayer also gives them +1 to wound. They can also inflict D3 mortals on themselves, so add an extra attack. So they can be up to 7 attacks each at damage 2. They are a very scary unit that does a lot of damage. And that D3 mortal damage is not that scary because the Grey Seer and Screaming Bell has got a 12-inch aura of heal D3 at the end of turn, so you can heal back the damage that you might take from that ability. One other thing to note is that when you recur a unit of Rat Ogres at half strength, you can recur 2 Warp Fire guns in that unit. So you don't have to just have 1 Warp Fire gun and 2 regular dudes, you can have 2 Warp Fire guns, which is quite good. Rat Ogres are just really solid. They've been solid for the entirety of this General's Handbook. They will continue to be solid for as long as the Grey Seer and Screaming Bell exists, or the Scourge Quran version at least. And yeah, that's it. Skaven are a good army, but a little boring right now for Skaven players. Now we're moving on to my picks. These are the lists that I decided to talk about because I think they're fun and cool, but they are strong, right? Not to say these lists aren't strong, because to get a 4-1 or 5-0 result, your list has to be strong, but these are a little more off-kilter and a little more fun. Starting with the Soulblight Gravelords list in the Backlund of Blood battle formation, you got Manfred von Carstein, a reinforced unit of Barrowguard, some Direwolves and a White King, a Vampire Lord, a unit of True Blades, reinforced Barrowguard, a Vampire Lord, another unit of True Blades, and reinforced Barrowguard. Soulblight are a strong army right now, but this is playing not with what has traditionally been very good, right? We've seen over the past 12 months or so, we've seen a lot of Prince Vordry, a lot of Blood Knights. We've seen Barrow Knights be very popular because they have an absurd amount of recursion and are quite tanky. We've seen a lot of Vengorian Lords and Radikar the Beast and just a whole bunch of things, but mostly vampire based. This is a more skeleton focused list. Highlighting that Manfred von Carstein's here. I haven't seen a whole lot of the Mortarks, at least in Soulblight, right? Manfred and Neferata haven't really shown up a whole lot. And then generally Mortarks, right? Usharan sees a lot of play. Arcan has been seeing quite a bit of play in the new Osiak Bone Reapers Battle Tome. Catacross was really good, but I think is less good in the current Battle Tome. And then Lady Alinda is pretty good, but Nighthaunt's in a bit of a weird spot. But that's to say that I think Manfred is cool, and it's interesting to see him show up. Beauregard can hit really hard, and having 3 units of them is really fun. You got Vampire Lords, just as fast little heroes. They can go do stuff, but they also synergize with the Beauregard here nicely, as I'll get to in a second. I'm going to highlight the Beauregard War Scroll a little bit. And then Skurgan True Blades are just a solid unit, right? They do a reasonable amount of damage, and they've got a 4-up strike last, which is quite good. It's just insane, right? And that ability is not once per turn army, so each of them can attempt the strike last. It just means you get a lot of potential strike last, and also Manfred has got strike first, so you have a lot of potential messing with the activation order, right? Is what you can do with all that. The Bacchanal Blood Battle Formation gives +1 a wound to vampire units when they charge, or +1 to cast when they're not in combat. So that's just really solid. It's the battle formation you see the most because it's the one that applies during the most points of the game. It just always happens, and it's just great. And so yeah, I'm going to move on to talking about the War Scrolls right now. So we've got Manfred here. He has got a decent melee profile. He's got a 3-up strike first if he charges, which is quite nice. Then if he slays enemy models with his combat attacks, for the rest of the turn you get +1 attacks for Death Rattle and Deadwalker units while they're wholly within 12 inches. That includes the Barrow Guard units in this list. So you get +1 to attack on your Barrow Guard, which is pretty strong. He's got a little Mortal Wound prayer. He can also redeploy units into combat, which is quite nice and quite unique. He's the only unit that can really do something like that, and being able to lock your opponent up at a point in which they don't expect it can be really strong, especially combined with your recursion or other things where you can get units in weird spots and then redeploy them into combat, and now your opponent's locked up and they weren't expecting to be. It's quite interesting and quite fun. Yeah, so that's Manfred. He's pretty good. He's also a multicast wizard. He's a 2-cast wizard. And Soulblight has some decent spells that they want to be casting as well. So, yeah, Manfred's pretty cool, and it's exciting to see him. I haven't seen him in a while, and I just wanted to say welcome back, friend. Then we've got Beauregard here. They're pretty slow. They don't have a ton of health. They're tanky enough, I guess, but it's not really their job. They've got 2 attacks here at 3s and 3s, rend 1, damage 1 with crit mortals. And then also, while any Soulblight Gravelord's infantry heroes are in their combat range, both them and the infantry hero have a 5-up ward save. So they can become reasonably tanky with that ability, and then all the recursion that you can get with the Deathly Invocation ability. So yeah, you've got infantry heroes in this list. You've got the 2 Vampire Lords and also the White King. So yeah, I just think they can get decent enough damage. They can be tanky enough. You've got recursion. Manfred can give them an extra attack. So they can be 3 attacks each with crit mortals. I don't know. I just think it's pretty cool. Beauregard are a fun unit, and exciting to see them hit tables. I love skeletons. They're a personal favorite thing of mine. So exciting to see them. Next, we've got Cruel Boys in a Swamp Horde Bullies battle formation. I used to play Cruel Boys. I brought them to a GT. I did terribly, and then I swore them off forever, basically. But I still, as an Orc player, I respect Cruel Boys, and I really exciting to see them do well. This list has got Gobsprak, the Mouth of Mork, Reinforced Gut Rippers, Tuners and Monster Killers, a Marshcrawler Sloggoth, a Killer Boss on Corpse Ripper Vulture with a Sneaky In Slippery Scumbag and Mork's Eye Pebble, 2 Reinforced Units of Gut Rippers, a unit of Monster Killers, and a Hobgot Slitter Boss. It's interesting. You've got the 2 big vultures to move around the board and do stuff. You got units gut rippers to do a lot of damage. You've got monster killers, which can sort of either do their own thing or shadow the gut rippers. I'll get onto the Swamp Horde Bullies battle formation in a little bit, but that is part of why you want monster killers, as well as it makes these big vultures pretty good. The Marshcross Slogoth can give you infantry units run and charge, which is very good as an army that's quite slow. Being able to make them faster and get into combat better is quite nice. And then the Hobgot Slitterboss here is in this list because he is the cheapest hero in the book. And you really need a hero to be sitting in your Skurgob Totem at all times. Skurgob Totem makes all your dirty tricks better, and that's what makes Kruleboy so good, right? Is they have these dirty tricks that they can pull out at multiple points during the battle. And the problem with them is they take a die roll and they become harder and harder the more of them you attempt. And the Skurgob Totem can make them slightly easier. So you've got dirty tricks like Venom Encrusted Weapons that give out crits on 5s. You've got a teleport, and then also you've got a strike last. Those are the 3 big dirty tricks that you can attempt. So yeah, I'll go into a couple of units here. So first we got Gobsprak. He's fast. He's not very tanky. You've got melee profile doesn't really matter. His real big ability that matters is this Mork Says No passive here that each time he unbinds a spell, you do D3 mortal damage on the caster, but if the unbinding roll is a 10 plus, you do D6 mortal damage. This ability's pretty cool. He's had this for as long as he's existed in the game, or an ability similar to this. Back in 3rd edition, I remember playing him in my Big War lists, RIP Big War, but it's really fun when you get to pop the head on a little goblin wizard or a little Skaven wizard that, like, tries to cast a spell and you get that 10 plus and do 6 mortal damage to them and then they're dead. So that's pretty fun. He's got a once per battle ability to give himself a 3d6 unbind, which is quite nice. His other abilities are fine. They're not particularly exciting. I think Gobsprak has just gotten to a point where at 240 points for a level 2 wizard, he's pretty efficient for that. Orcs have got a really great manifestation lore, and Kruleboy's spell lore is also pretty solid. You've got a +1 to save spell, a -1 attack spell, and like a mortal wound damage spell. So I think that Gobsprak is probably just efficient enough as a caster to make that work. And then his other abilities are solid. He's also just an awesome model. Those vultures are incredible and they look great. Moving on, we've got Gut Rippers plus Swamp Horde Bullies. So this is the Gut Ripper melee profile. Might not look like much, because it's really not. 2 attacks, 4s and 3s, no rend damage 1 with crit mortals. But then you've got this ganging up ability. So if a Kruleboy's unit, you pick a Kruleboy's unit to be the target. And that unit must be in combat with an enemy unit that is in combat with another friendly Kruleboy's unit. So as long as 2 Kruleboy's units are in combat with the same enemy unit, you can then get +1 attacks to the target's melee weapons. And so what that means is that if your Gut Rippers are in combat with an enemy unit, and then also either the Slogoth or the Monster Killers or one of your Vultures, you can then get an additional attack. And then with Venom Encrusted Weapons to give them crits on 5s, it means you do on average 20 mortal damage, which is pretty nuts. So that's the combo, right? His Gut Rippers can do pretty decent damage when you have the ganging up ability. There's enough ways that you can make them a little bit tankier, including their own Gut Rippers have a -1 to hit ability that's pretty solid. So you have a lot of wounds of Gut Rippers that can be hard to kill and can do decent mortal damage. And you've got enough tricks that you can sort of make that work. It's the same tricks Kruleboys have been pulling for the entire General's Handbook, so people might be aware of them, able to play around them, sick of them, whatever, but Kruleboys are still doing pretty solid. Especially since they've gotten some buffs. But if you want to play Kruleboys, it's not a terrible time to start. But this ability, Swamp Horde Bullies, is Scourge of Garan and will most likely be leaving when the next General's Handbook goes around, and that's going to really suck for Kruleboys. I think they're going to really struggle. And then finally, we've got this Slaves to Darkness list in the Dark Oath Horde battle formation. It's got Gunner Brand, 2 units of Dark Oath Marauders, Singri Brand, and the Oathsworn kin. Then you got a Chaos Lord on Demonic Mount with the unit Chaos Knights, an Olgroid Mimrodon with Deathmonger and the Varanite Shackle, and you reinforce units of Therodons. Then you got Chaos Lord on Demonic Mount again, unit of Knights, a Mimrodon, and reinforced Therodons. This is an interesting Slaves to Darkness list. It runs some of the stuff that you might expect, like the Chaos Knights, but a bunch of stuff you don't. I think Gunner Brand has just become cheap enough that for 3 little dudes to run around the board, it's not too bad. And then also the Oathsworn kin are a wizard as well, which means you can cast spells, and Slaves have got some decent spells they want to cast. Dark Oath Marauders are just cheap little dudes to go do stuff, and then you can recur them with your Dark Oath Horde battle formation. This list is really built around the Therodons, and Therodons are great. I think they're a really solid unit that are underplayed. They hit really hard, and I know they're in an army that has a lot of stuff that hits really hard, so if you're going to play Therodons, why not play Vanguard, or Chosen, or Warriors, or Knights, or whatever, but I think they're really cool, and they're awesome models, and they just do a lot of fun stuff. I will point out here the Varanite Shackle, which can give a 6-up ward to non-Warriors of Chaos units. So that's everything in this list except for the Chaos Lord, Demonic Mount, and the Chaos Knights. And then also a 6-up ward means that combos with the Pledge to Nurgle, which the Pledge to Nurgle usually is a pretty terrible pledge. So the pledges, to quickly explain, at the beginning of your hero, or during your hero phase, you'll get to hand out a pledge. And there's a pledge for each of the Chaos Gods, and they buff your units in different ways. Tzeentch gives them a little teleport. Slaanesh gives them a 3d6, drop the lowest charge. Khorne gives them +1 attack. And then Nurgle gives them a 6-up ward. But if they already have a 6-up ward, they get a 5-up ward. So the Varanite Shackle being able to give out a 6-up ward means that then if you pledge them to Nurgle, they can get to a 5-up ward. Now here in the Ogre Therodons, they have the Eroding Icon. That is one of the Ensorcel banners. They're a unique enhancement type that Slaves to Darkness can give to their units that have standard bearers. The Eroding Icon pledges them to Nurgle, so they get the 6-up ward, or the 5-up ward if they're close enough to the Mimrodon. And also means that critical hits can't be scored against them, which is quite nice. So I'm going to move on here and talk about Ogre Therodons. They're just a cool unit, right? 6-inch move is reasonably fast, decent amount of health with an okay save. With that 5-up ward on top of that, a 4-up save with a 5-up ward, 5 health each is quite good. Then they've got just decent attacks, right? 4 attacks each, 4s and 2s, rend 1, damage 2. They can have +1 damage once per battle. So they can be damage 3, anti-infantry +1 rend means a lot of the time they're damage 2. There's a lot of infantry running around. You could all attack them. They could be 3s and 2s, rend 2, damage 3. They're just really solid. Ogre Therodons are a solid unit. And they're sort of overlooked, and they get a little bit outshone by the other units in the book, but I think they're a unit that deserves people to look at them because I think they're pretty awesome. Oh, no, ignore that one, sorry. So yeah, thanks for watching. This was episode 5. Join me next week for the next episode. If you have anything you want me to talk about in more detail, put it in the comments. Thank you.